common passage for food and air. This pharynx, it is divided into three parts. First one is oropharynx, and the second one is laryngopharynx, and the third one is nasopharynx. This is the part. It is divided into three parts. See, this is human's respiratory system, and this is vestibule and oral cavity, and the palate. This is the palate. It is the it is the roof of the oral cavity that separates the oral cavity with the nasal chamber. Here, this is the part where the pharynx is located. See, this oral cavity opens into the pharynx, whereas the nasal chamber also opens into the pharynx. Here, the voice box or the sound box, larynx is located here, and the digestive canal, esophagus, also opens from the pharynx here only. So according to this location here, where the nares or nostrils or the nasal chambers opens into the pharynx, through this one, this part is known as nasopharynx. Where the larynx leads into the pharynx part, this part is known as laryngopharynx. Where the oral cavity and esophagus opens, this part is known as oropharynx. See here, the pharynx leads into the respiratory system and also opens into the digestive system. Pharynx opens into the larynx through the glottis. This glottis has a cartilaginous flap. The cartilaginous flap of the glottis, it is known as epiglottis. The cartilaginous flap of the glottis is known as epiglottis. This epiglottis prevents entry of the food particles into the respiratory system while swallowing process. Remember, this is the respiratory system. See, this is inspiration process. During inhalation process, the gases never enters into the digestive canal during inhalation process only, but while talking or laughing, so in these conditions some amount of gases will enters into the esophagus. No, but during inhalation process only. In this particular process, the gases never enters into the digestive canal, but while swallowing, after mastication, in this swallowing process, the food never enters into the respiratory system. Here, because of two parts, the epiglottis, the cartilaginous flap of the glottis, this epiglottis prevents the entry of the food particles into the respiratory system while swallowing. So it prevents entry of the food in a respiratory system while swallowing process. This is one part. One more part here. This is another part is present here. This part is known as gullet. The food enters into the digestive canal through the gullet, but this gullet prevents the entry of the gases into the digestive canal during inspiration process. While inspiration process, the gases never enters into the digestive canal because of the gullet. It prevents entry of the gases into the digestive canal. But whereas in swallowing, the food will not enters into the respiratory canal because of the epiglottis. These are the two parts here. Here in the pharynx region, it contains the lymphoid tissues. Lymphoid tissues. The lymphoid tissues are known as tonsils. Lymphoid tissues are known as tonsils here. These tonsils are divided into three types. One is pharyngeal tonsils. It is located in the pharynx. It is also known as adenoids. Second one is palatine tonsils. Palatine tonsils. And the third one is lingual tonsils. Lingual tonsils. Lingual tonsils. See, palatine tonsils. What is the palatine? This is the part. Palatine tonsils. Palate, above the roof of the oral cavity. Palatine tonsils. Pharyngeal tonsils. Pharynx are located here. These are the pharynx tonsils. Pharyngeal tonsils. Lingual tonsils. Lingua means tongue. So the anatomical setup, all these are communicated with each other to form a group or the ring-like structures. It is known as Waldeyer's ring. A ring-like anatomical setup of all these lymphoid tissues are grouped to form the Waldeyer's ring. This is regarding to the pharynx. Okay. Now we are going to discuss about the next part is known as in and American English. In British English here it mentioned about the OE, some other American English here it starts with the ESO. Both are correct, no problem. So the esophagus, it starts from the pharynx. It leads from the pharynx to the mid-thoracic region, through the thoracic region, passes through the thoracic region and connects with the stomach. Connects with the stomach. From the pharynx onwards, from the pharynx to the large intestine, the walls of the pharynx and esophagus, stomach, small intestine, large intestine, it is made up of several layers. In pharynx and esophagus, the serosa layer is absent, but the muscularis, submucosa and mucosa layers are present in the remaining parts. See, the pharynx opens into the esophagus through the upper esophageal sphincter. Upper esophageal sphincter. And this pharynx, it is a muscular part. It is divided into anterior part, anterior upside, whereas the middle part and the posterior part, the anterior and middle part of the esophagus, it is made up of voluntary muscles or the striated muscles. But the posterior part, not total middle part, at the first few middle part of the pharynx, the walls of the anterior part, some part of the middle walls of the middle part is made up of striated muscles, but the posterior part of the This one is, it is made up of involuntary muscles. Involuntary muscles are the smooth muscles. Finally, the walls of the esophagus, it is made up of longitudinal and circular muscles. These longitudinal muscles and the circular muscles are helps for the wavy like movements. It gives the wavy like movements to the esophagus for the easy passage of the food particles from one place to another place. These wavy like movements are known as peristaltic movements. So due to the presence of the mucus and for the peristaltic movements, the food immediately passes from the esophagus and finally enters into the stomach. Here, the opening of the esophagus into the stomach through a small opening. This opening is guarded by one more sphincter. This sphincter is known as gastroesophageal sphincter. Gastroesophageal sphincter, or another name of this sphincter is known as cardiac sphincter. So gastroesophageal sphincter or the cardiac sphincter is located where the esophagus opens into the stomach. See here, now we are going to discuss about the next part is stomach in our body. See, stomach, it is a J-shaped structure or muscular bag-like structure. Of digestive. Muscular bag-like structure of the stomach, it is divided into four parts. First one is cardiac stomach. First one is the cardiac stomach, and the second one is the largest part of the stomach is known as body, and the third one is fundus stomach, and the last one is pyloric stomach. So this is the stomach which is divided into cardiac stomach, and the second one is the largest part is body. Next one is fundus stomach, and the last one is pyloric stomach. See, esophagus, it opens into cardiac stomach through a small opening. This opening is known as cardia. Opening or the aperture is known as cardia. This cardia allows food from esophagus to the cardiac stomach. But this cardia, it is surrounded by sphincter. This sphincter is known as cardiac sphincter or the gastroesophageal sphincter. This gastroesophageal sphincter prevents backflow of food from the, see, this cardia allows the food from the esophagus to the stomach, but it never get back to the esophagus because of the gastroesophageal sphincter in some conditions only. Prevents backflow of the food from the cardiac stomach to the cardiac stomach to the esophagus. Esophagus. This is cardiac sphincters. Now the second part, the largest part of the stomach is known as body, and the third part is pharynx stomach, and the pharynx stomach leads into the pyloric stomach. This pyloric stomach, it opens into small intestine, opens into small intestine. Here the small intestine has three parts. Small intestine, see the C-shaped first part of the small intestine is looks like a C shape. The C-shaped part of the small intestine is duodenum. Duodenum, the first part, it is the first part of the small intestine. And highly coiled structure of the small intestine, it is ileum. Second part of the small intestine is ileum, and the last part or the posterior part of the small intestine is jejunum, and the third part of the small intestine is known as ileum. Ileum, this is the third part, this is the first part, and this is the second part. See, pyloric stomach, the last part of the stomach, it will opens into the duodenum through a small opening or the aperture. A small aperture is present where the pyloric stomach opens into the duodenum. This aperture is known as pylorus. Aperture is known as pylorus. This pylorus allows the food. Pylorus allows the food from the pyloric stomach to the duodenum, and it is guarded by a sphincter. This sphincter is known as pyloric sphincter. Pyloric sphincter. The pylorus allows the food from the pyloric stomach into the duodenum. This pylorus is guarded by pyloric sphincter. This pyloric sphincter prevents the backflow of the food from the duodenum into the pyloric stomach. See, these are the differences between the cardia pylorus, cardiac sphincter, and the pyloric sphincter. Upper esophageal sphincter, gastroesophageal sphincter, nothing but cardiac sphincter, and now the pyloric sphincter of the stomach. This is esophagus and stomach and their parts. We are going to discuss about the what are the parts, what are the glands are present in the stomach. See, the walls of the pharynx and the esophagus have no serosa layer, outer layer, the walls. But the stomach, from the stomach, small intestine, it has 4 layers: serosa layer, muscularis, submucosa, and mucosa layers. Later we will discuss about those points. Now, gastric glands in stomach. The walls of the stomach secretes gastric glands according to the location of the stomach. Here we segregate these are into 3 parts. So the glands which are secreted by the cardia is known as cardiac glands. Cardiac glands. And the glands from the pharynx stomach, pharynx glands. Pharynx glands. And the glands from the pyloric stomach, pyloric glands. Pyloric glands. These are the 3 different types of the glands. See, the cardiac glands secretes mucus due to the presence of the goblet. So the cardiac gland secretes mucus. This mucus helps for the lubrication of the food particles, which means easy passage of the food particles. At the same time, the pyloric glands also secretes mucus and gastrin also. In some books they mention about the gastrin here. Actually, we will discuss this gastrin here also. But the fundic glands, it release actually the fundic glands. Here it is divided into, it contains different types of cells. First one is neck cells. This is the neck cells. And the next one is chief cells or oxyntic cells. Next one is chief cells or peptic cells or zymogen cells. Next one is G cells. These are the different types of the cells are present in fundic glands. The neck cells of the fundic glands secretes mucus only for the lubrication of the food particles. But the parietal cells or the oxyntic cells secretes hydrochloric acid. This hydrochloric acid kills the bacteria and viruses, and it is also activates the proteolytic enzymes, proenzymes. Hydrochloric acid and Casil's intrinsic factor. This Casil's intrinsic factor that synthesizes the vitamin B12. It synthesizes vitamin B12. Due to the deficiency of the vitamin B12, the person suffers with pernicious anemia disease. This is Casil's intrinsic factor. But the chief cells or the peptic cells or the zymogen cells secretes inactive pepsinogen. When any enzyme ends with the prefix "gen", that indicates inactive form, simple one. And prorenin, this is pro enzyme, it is also one of the inactive form. So the active form of the pepsinogen is pepsin, and the active form of the prorenin is renin. These are produced by the chief cells or the peptic cells or the zymogen cells, whereas the G cells, it releases argentifin cells. For the production of the gastrin. See, this is the components of the gastric glands. So the gastric glands secretes gastric juice. The gastric juice contains mucus, hydrochloric acid, Casil's intrinsic factor, pepsinogen, prorenin and gastrin. Not only this one is, it also contains lipase, that is gastric lipase also present. Due to the presence of the hydrochloric acid, the pH of the gastric juice is 1.9 to 1.8. This is the pH of the gastric juice. Okay, regarding to the gastric gland.